The knock on my door at 7 in the morning was aggressive enough to wake my dog, and that was saying something because Charlie could sleep through a tornado. I stumbled out of bed, still in my pajama pants and a faded college t-shirt, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor with an emergency. What I got instead was Patricia Thornberry, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, standing on my porch with a clipboard and an expression that could curdle milk. "Aaron Zimmerman, I presume?" She didn't wait for confirmation. "I'm here regarding a violation of our community standards. Specifically, the unauthorized solar panel installation on your property." I blinked at her, my brain still foggy from sleep. "Unauthorized. I got all the permits from the county. Everything's legal." Patricia's lips thinned into a line so tight it practically disappeared. "County permits are irrelevant. The HOA bylaws clearly state that any exterior modifications require board approval. You installed those panels 6 months ago without so much as a phone call." That woke me up faster than coffee ever could. I'd bought this house in Scottsdale, Arizona 18 months ago, specifically because of the solar potential. The previous owner had mentioned the HOA was relatively hands-off, and I'd done my due diligence with the city and county. The solar installation was a massive project. I'd spent nearly $200,000 on a cutting-edge system that didn't just power my house. It generated enough electricity to feed back into the grid. I had a contract with Arizona Public Service where they actually bought power from me. "Look, Patricia, I understand there might have been a communication gap, but the panels are already installed and operational. They're not hurting anyone." "They're an eyesore," she snapped. "Multiple neighbors have complained." The aesthetic uniformity of Sunset Ridge is one of our main selling points. Those panels need to go, or you'll be facing daily fines of $500 until compliance is achieved. I felt my jaw drop. $500 a day? That's insane. "Do you have any idea how much that system costs to install?" "Should have thought of that before breaking the rules, Mr. Zimmerman. You have 7 days to begin removal. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus SUV, leaving me standing in my doorway with Charlie whining at my feet. I spent the rest of the day reading through the HOA bylaws I'd admittedly only skimmed when I bought the house. Sure enough, buried in Section 47, subsection C, there was language about exterior modifications requiring approval. But there was also Arizona State Law SB 1145, passed back in 2013, which prohibited HOAs from banning solar installations. I figured I had legal ground to stand on. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a guy named Marcus Reed I'd used for the house purchase. He listened to my situation and let out a low whistle. "They can require you to submit for approval, but they can't actually deny you based on Arizona law. However, the fines for not submitting in the first place might stick. Let me draft a response and we'll request a hearing with the board. In the meantime, don't remove anything." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which meant 10 days of waiting after Patricia's 7-day deadline. True to her word, on day 8, I received a certified letter informing me that I was being fined $500 per day, starting immediately. The letter was signed by Patricia and 2 other board members, Richard Kowalski and Denise Fletcher. I showed up to the HOA board meeting on a Tuesday evening at the community center, a beige stucco building that matched every other structure in our planned community. The meeting room had that distinctive smell of cheap coffee and air conditioning running too cold. About 15 other homeowners were scattered in the folding chairs, most of them looking bored or annoyed at being there. Patricia sat at a table at the front with Richard, a balding man in his 60s who kept adjusting his glasses, and Denise, a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "First order of business," she announced, "the ongoing violation at 4782 Desert Bloom Lane. Mr. Zimmerman, you're here to address the board." I stood up, my lawyer beside me. "Yes, and I've brought legal counsel." Patricia's expression soured. "How formal, please proceed." Marcus laid out our position cleanly. The solar panels were legal under state law. While I acknowledged I should have submitted the plans to the HOA before installation, they legally couldn't deny the installation. He proposed a compromise. I'd pay a one-time fine of $2,000 for the procedural violation, and the HOA would retroactively approve the installation. "Absolutely not," Patricia said before Marcus even finished. "The panels are visible from the street. They reflect sunlight into neighboring yards. They've decreased property values. This isn't about the law, it's about maintaining our community standards." "Actually, it is about the law," Marcus replied calmly. Arizona Revised Statute 33-1816 specifically prohibits HOAs from preventing solar installations. You can regulate placement to some degree, but you cannot require removal. Richard leaned forward. "What if we offered an alternative location? Perhaps ground-mounted panels in the backyard, not visible from the street." I'd actually considered that during the planning phase. "The roof has optimal southern exposure and angle. Ground mounting would reduce efficiency by about 30% and would require twice the footprint. Plus, it would actually take up the yard space I use." "Then we're at an impasse," Patricia declared. "The board votes to deny retroactive approval and to continue fines until the panels are removed or relocated to an approved position." The vote was 2-1, with Denise abstaining, which apparently counted as a yes in HOA math. I left that meeting $4,000 in the hole and facing ongoing daily fines. Over the next week, things escalated. Patricia apparently had time on her hands because she drove by my house daily, taking photos. She sent letters to my neighbors encouraging them to complain. 3 of them did, all citing vague concerns about glare and property values, though when I talked to them directly, most admitted Patricia had pressured them. My next-door neighbor, an older guy named Frank Garrett, actually apologized. "She cornered me at the mailbox for 20 minutes, Aaron." I signed her petition just to get her to leave. "Honestly, I don't care about your panels. They don't affect me at all." But 2 neighbors, Margaret and David Chen, who lived across the street, seemed genuinely upset. Margaret knocked on my door one afternoon while I was working from home. "The glare from your panels hits our bedroom window in the morning," she said, her arms crossed. "It wakes us up at dawn. It's really inconsiderate." I invited her in and showed her the installation specs. "These are anti-reflective panels. They actually produce less glare than a standard window. If you're seeing reflections, it might be from something else." She wasn't convinced. "All I know is we never had this problem before you put those things up." After she left, I actually went over to their house with a light meter at dawn the next day. David answered the door, looking confused. I explained what I wanted to test, and he let me into their bedroom. Sure enough, there was glare, but it was coming from the window of the house next to mine, not my panels. When I showed them the readings, David had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sorry, man." Patricia was so insistent about the panels causing problems, we just assumed. But Margaret wasn't ready to let it go. "Well, what about property values? Everyone knows solar panels make houses harder to sell." "That's actually the opposite of true," I said, trying to keep my patience. "Studies show solar panels increase home values, especially in Arizona. Plus, my system generates enough power that I'm selling electricity back to the grid. I'm actually making money. That last part just slipped out, but David's eyes widened. Wait, you're selling power? Like to apps? Yeah, my system produces about 40% more than I use. I have a contract where they buy the excess at wholesale rates. It's not a fortune, but it covers my electric bill and then some. David looked thoughtful. Huh, that's actually pretty smart. The conversation shifted after that, and while Margaret still seemed skeptical, they at least agreed to tell Patricia they'd resolved their concerns. Not that it mattered. Patricia wasn't interested in resolution. The fines continued to pile up. After a month, the HOA claimed I owed $15,000. Marcus filed a lawsuit challenging the fines and seeking a declaratory judgment that the HOA couldn't ban the panels. That process, he warned me, could take 6 months or more. Then things got weird. I came home one Thursday afternoon to find a notice from Arizona Public Service taped to my door. It stated that my net metering agreement was under review due to irregularities in the connection. I immediately called their customer service line. After 20 minutes on hold, I got a representative named Jessica who sounded genuinely confused about the flag on my account. It says here that your HOA contacted us claiming the solar installation was illegal and requesting we disconnect your feed-in capability. My blood pressure spiked. The installation isn't illegal. I have all the county permits. The HOA is just mad I didn't ask their permission first. Okay, well, we'll need documentation. Can you email us the permits and your installation inspection certificates? I spent the next hour scanning and sending documents. Jessica assured me it would be resolved within a few business days, but the idea that Patricia had gone after my power contract infuriated me. That felt like crossing a line from petty HOA tyranny into actual interference with my livelihood. I called Marcus. Can she do this? Just call up APS and make up complaints. It's legally questionable, he said. If she's making false statements that harm your business interests, that could be tortious interference. We might be able to add that to the lawsuit. Did APS actually disconnect you? Not yet. They're reviewing. Keep all documentation. Record every interaction. This might actually help our case by showing bad faith on the HOA's part. That weekend, I decided to do some research on Patricia herself. A little social media digging revealed she'd been HOA president for 7 years, running unopposed in the last 3 elections. She'd successfully sued 3 other homeowners over various violations, all of which settled before trial. The woman had a pattern. What I found most interesting was a local news article from 2 years ago about a dispute between Patricia and a neighbor who'd painted his house a non-approved shade of beige. The article mentioned that Patricia lived at 4820 Desert Bloom Lane, which was just 4 houses down from me. It also mentioned she was a retired real estate agent who'd sold homes in Sunset Ridge for 20 years before retiring. On Monday, APS called back. They'd reviewed my documentation and determined the installation was fully compliant. The flag on my account was removed. But the representative mentioned something that caught my attention. Just so you know, we've had 3 calls about your property in the last month, all from the same person claiming various violations. We've noted in your file that these complaints appear to be harassment. Can you tell me who's calling? I can't share that information, but let's just say we're aware of the situation and future complaints from that source will be disregarded unless they come with legal documentation. Small victory, but it felt good. Patricia's attempt to sabotage my power contract had failed. Then I got an idea. If APS bought power from me and I lived in Sunset Ridge, Where did that power actually go? The grid was interconnected, sure, but local generation typically fed to the nearest distribution points. I called APS back and asked to speak to someone in their commercial accounts division. After explaining my situation and my question, I was transferred to a guy named Tom Rutherford, who handled community power distribution. So your system at 4782 Desert Bloom is our largest residential feed-in that neighborhood, Tom said. You're generating about 8 kilowatts excess on average, right? About that, yeah. Okay, so that power feeds into the local distribution transformer, which services about 40 homes in your immediate area. Basically, your excess power is getting used by your neighbors before it even hits the main grid. It's more efficient that way, less transmission loss. My brain started working. Can you tell me which specific homes are on that transformer? I'd need to pull up the map. Hang on. I heard keyboard clicking. Okay, looks like you're on transformer 447B. That services Desert Bloom Lane from 4760 to 4840, both sides of the street. About 38 properties total. I thanked Tom and hung up, then pulled up a neighborhood map. Patricia Thornberry lived at 4820 Desert Bloom. She was absolutely on the same transformer as me. The irony was too perfect. Patricia was demanding I remove my solar panels while simultaneously using the electricity they generated. I sat back in my chair and laughed for the first time in weeks. Marcus loved it when I told him. This is perfect. It doesn't change the legal situation, but it's excellent leverage. She's going to look ridiculous if this becomes public knowledge. How do we make it public knowledge? Well, we have a hearing scheduled for next month, right? We present the information there. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare a detailed analysis of your power generation and the neighborhood distribution. Make it airtight. I spent the next 2 weeks becoming an expert on electrical grid distribution in Scottsdale. I contacted APS again and requested detailed records of my power generation and feed-in history, which they provided as part of my account. I created charts and graphs showing exactly how much power I'd generated, how much I'd used, and how much had fed back into the local grid. The numbers were impressive. Over the 6 months my system had been operational, I generated 42,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. I'd used about 28,000, meaning I'd fed 14,000 kilowatt hours back into the grid. At an average of 8 cents per kilowatt hour for wholesale power, APS had paid me about $1,100. More importantly, that power had offset the need for APS to generate or purchase that electricity from other sources, reducing costs for local distribution. I also did something a bit sneaky. I filed a public records request with the City of Scottsdale for electrical usage data for my street. It took a week, but I got back aggregated data that didn't violate anyone's privacy, but did show that average electricity usage in my immediate neighborhood had gone down about 3% since my solar installation went live. The savings were small but measurable. Armed with all this information, I went into the next HOA hearing feeling confident. The meeting was packed this time because word had spread about the ongoing dispute. At least 30 homeowners showed up, including several who'd approached me privately to say they were considering solar panels themselves and wanted to see how this played out. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately moved to the agenda item about my property. Mr. Zimmerman, the fines now total $22,500. Have you begun removal of the unauthorized panels? I stood up. No, and I won't be removing them. However, I have new information to present to the board and the community. Patricia looked annoyed. This isn't a forum for speeches, Mr. Zimmerman. Actually, according to the HOA bylaws Section 12, any homeowner facing fines over $5,000 has the right to present a defense to the general membership, not just the board. I'm invoking that right. Richard checked his copy of the bylaws and nodded reluctantly. He's correct. Patricia's jaw clenched. Fine. 5 minutes. I walked to the front and pulled up my laptop, connecting it to the projector the HOA used for presentations. My first slide showed a photo of my solar installation. 6 months ago, I installed a solar panel system on my roof. It's a significant investment in clean energy and energy independence. I acknowledge I should have submitted the plans to the HOA first, and I've repeatedly offered to pay a reasonable fine for that procedural error. However, the system itself is fully legal under Arizona law, and the demand to remove it is not only unreasonable but also hypocritical. Patricia started to interrupt, but several homeowners told her to let me finish. My next slide showed the power generation data. This system generates about 40% more electricity than my house uses. That excess power feeds back into the grid under a net metering agreement with APS. Over 6 months, that's 14,000 kilowatt-hours of clean energy. Next slide. The neighborhood map with the transformer coverage area highlighted. What makes this particularly relevant is how local power distribution works. Excess power from my panels feeds into transformer 447B, which services 38 homes on this street. Essentially, my panels are generating electricity that my immediate neighbors use, reducing the load on the main grid and reducing everyone's costs. I paused for effect. That transformer services addresses from 4760 to 4840 Desert Bloom Lane. Patricia, your house is at 4820, correct? Patricia's face went red. That's irrelevant. Is it? Because you're demanding I remove a solar installation that's actively generating electricity you personally use. You're literally benefiting from my panels every single day while trying to force me to tear them down. The room erupted in conversation. Several people laughed. Others started asking questions all at once. Patricia banged her gavel. That's enough. The source of electricity is completely beside the point. The panels are an aesthetic violation. A woman I didn't know stood up. I live at 4795 and I think the panels look fine. They're barely visible from the street. Another voice. I want to know more about the cost savings. Are you saying the panels reduce all our electric bills? I addressed that question. Indirectly, yes. When local generation increases, APS doesn't have to source as much power from distant generators, which reduces transmission costs and grid load. Those savings can translate to lower overall rates, though the effect is small with just one installation. Frank Garrett, my neighbor, stood up. I've been tracking my electric bills since Aaron's panels went up. I've noticed they're running about 5 to 8% lower than the same months last year, even though I'm using about the same amount of power. I thought it was just APS changing their rates, but maybe it's related to this. Patricia was losing control of the room. Everyone, please. We're getting off topic. The issue is that Mr. Zimmerman violated HOA procedures. Marcus stood up. Then let's address that directly. Arizona law is clear that HOAs cannot prohibit solar installations. My client has offered repeatedly to pay a reasonable fine for the procedural violation and to have the installation retroactively approved. The board's insistence on removal is legally indefensible and will not survive judicial review. We have a court date in 3 months and I'm confident we'll prevail. Richard Kowalski cleared his throat. Patricia, maybe we should consider the settlement offer. If we end up in court and lose, the HOA might be liable for his legal fees on top of our own. We're not settling, Patricia snapped. The rules exist for a reason. Denise Fletcher, who'd been quiet, finally spoke up. What if we took a community vote? Let the membership decide if they want to approve the installation. Patricia looked horrified. That's not how this works. The board makes decisions about rule enforcement. Actually, I said, pulling up another document on the projector. According to the bylaws section 34, any board decision can be overturned by a 2/3 vote of the general membership if a petition is submitted with signatures from at least 20% of homeowners. Sunset Ridge has 212 homes, so that would require signatures from 43 homeowners. I pulled out a folder. I took the liberty of talking to my neighbors this week. I have signatures from 68 homeowners requesting that the membership vote on whether to approve my solar installation and void the fines. The look on Patricia's face was priceless. I handed the petition to Richard, who started reviewing the signatures. Patricia grabbed it from him, scanning the pages with increasing anger. "This is a circus," she muttered. "It's democracy," someone called out from the audience. Richard looked uncomfortable. "If the petition is valid, we have to hold a vote within 30 days. That's the rule." Patricia shuffled through the papers, clearly trying to find a way out. Some of these signatures aren't dated properly, and this one is illegible. Marcus walked over and examined the petition. "I reviewed these signatures myself. They all comply with the bylaws requirements. Unless you can identify specific invalid signatures, the petition stands." The meeting devolved into arguments for another 20 minutes before Patricia finally, reluctantly, agreed to schedule a membership vote for 4 weeks out. The fines would continue accruing until then, she insisted, which Marcus noted for the record as further evidence of bad faith. As people filed out, several homeowners approached me with questions about solar installations. 2 of them asked for my installer's contact information. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. That was something, watching Patricia squirm. She's had this neighborhood under her thumb for too long. Over the next 4 weeks, the campaign got intense. Patricia went door to door with a presentation about how solar panels would ruin property values and make the neighborhood look like an industrial park. She printed flyers and left them on doorsteps. She even organized a community standards meeting, where she brought in a real estate agent who claimed homes with visible solar panels sold for 10% less than comparable homes without them. I did my research on that claim and found the study she was citing was from 2009 and had been thoroughly debunked by more recent research showing solar installations actually increased property values. I made my own flyers with the current data and distributed them. I also went door to door, talking to neighbors personally. Most people were reasonable once they understood the facts. The panels weren't ugly. They weren't dangerous, and they were helping reduce neighborhood electricity costs, at least marginally. Several people expressed frustration with Patricia's aggressive tactics. One neighbor, a younger woman named Sarah Mills, told me Patricia had threatened to report her for having a wreath on her door that was supposedly non-compliant with HOA holiday decoration rules. "She's using fear to control people. I'm voting for your panels just on principle." The vote was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the community center. I showed up early and was shocked to see nearly 180 people there, way more than ever attended a normal meeting. The room was packed, with people standing along the walls. Patricia called the meeting to order and explained the vote. "We're here to determine whether to retroactively approve the solar installation at 4782 Desert Bloom Lane and void the accumulated fines. This is highly irregular, but the bylaws allow it. I want to make clear that a vote to approve this would set a precedent that could undermine the board's ability to enforce any standards." Marcus stood up. That's a mischaracterization. This vote is specific to this installation and does not prevent the board from enforcing legitimate standards in the future. The debate went on for 30 minutes, with people speaking for and against. Most of the opposition came from a small group of Patricia's friends, who echoed her concerns about aesthetics and property values. The support was broader and more varied, including people who wanted solar panels themselves, people who appreciated the environmental benefits, and people who were just tired of Patricia's heavy-handed tactics. Finally, we voted using paper ballots to ensure privacy. Richard and Denise counted while Patricia watched like a hawk, challenging several ballots for minor issues like stray marks. Marcus objected to most of her challenges, and Richard, looking exhausted, overruled her more often than not. The final count, 142 in favor of approving the installation, 38 against. It wasn't even close. Patricia stood up, her face pale. "This is a mistake. You're all making a huge mistake." But it was done. The installation was approved and the fines were voided. I felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. People congratulated me as they filed out. Several asked when I could share my installer's information, saying they wanted to get quotes for their own homes. I thought that was the end of it. I was very wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the HOA attorney, not Marcus but a different lawyer representing the board. The letter informed me that while the membership had voted to approve my installation, I was still liable for fines during the period of non-compliance before the vote. The total, $28,000. I immediately called Marcus. "Can they do this?" The vote was supposed to void the fines. The vote voided future fines and approved the installation. There's some ambiguity about whether it voids past fines. This is Patricia being vindictive. We can fight it in court, which we're already doing, so it's just another item on the complaint. But it got worse. That same week, I received a notice from the county assessor's office. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my solar installation was unpermitted construction that should increase my property tax assessment. The complaint was anonymous, but I had a pretty good idea who filed it. I gathered all my permits and went down to the assessor's office. A bored-looking clerk reviewed my paperwork and confirmed everything was in order. "Whoever filed this complaint either didn't know you had permits or was just harassing you. Your assessment won't change. Can you tell me who filed it? Anonymous complaints are kept confidential, sorry." I documented everything and sent it to Marcus. His response was terse. "She's escalating. Be careful." I wasn't sure what being careful meant in this context until I came home one evening to find a code enforcement officer from the city of Scottsdale examining my solar panels from the street. I walked over and introduced myself. "Aaron Zimmerman, I live here. Can I help you?" The officer, a middle-aged Hispanic man with a badge that read Ramirez, looked relieved to see me. "Hey, yeah, we got a complaint about unpermitted electrical work. I'm just checking it out." "I have all the permits. Want to see them?" I brought out my folder of documentation, which I'd started keeping near the door for exactly this reason. Officer Ramirez reviewed everything and nodded. "This all looks good. Frankly, this is one of the cleanest installations I've seen. Some people try to DIY this stuff and it's a disaster, but you used a licensed contractor and got proper inspections." "Can I ask who complained?" Complaint came through the HOA, actually. A Patricia Thornberry contacted our office saying there was dangerous electrical work being done without permits. The work was finished 6 months ago, and as you can see, fully permitted. Ramirez made a note on his tablet. "Yeah, I'll close this as unfounded." Between you and me, we get a lot of HOA complaints that turn out to be personal disputes rather than actual code violations. It's frustrating because it wastes our time when we could be dealing with real problems. After he left, I sat on my porch and tried to figure out Patricia's endgame. The woman had lost the vote decisively. The community had spoken. Why was she still coming after me? I got my answer a few days later when Frank knocked on my door, looking worried. "Hey, Aaron, I thought you should know. Patricia's been going around telling people that if anyone else installs solar panels, she'll make their lives hell like she did yours. She's using you as an example to scare people off." That made sense in a twisted way. If Patricia couldn't beat me, she could at least make the victory so painful that nobody else would try. It was scorched earth tactics. "How many people are actually planning to install panels?" I asked. "I know at least 5 households that were getting quotes. After seeing what you went through, a couple of them are reconsidering." That night, I made a decision. I couldn't let Patricia's bullying prevent other people from making their own choices about solar power. I created a detailed timeline of everything that had happened, all documented with copies of letters, emails, and photos. Then, I contacted the Arizona Republic, the state's largest newspaper, and asked if they'd be interested in a story about HOA overreach regarding solar installations. A reporter named Jennifer Costa called me the next day. "I've covered HOA disputes before. They can get pretty ugly. What makes your story different?" I told her everything, including the irony of Patricia using electricity from my panels while trying to force me to remove them. Jennifer laughed. "That's perfect. I'd love to do a story. Can you provide documentation?" I sent her everything. She interviewed me, Marcus, several neighbors, and even got a statement from Tom at APS confirming the details about local power distribution. She reached out to Patricia for comment, but Patricia refused to talk to her. The story ran on a Sunday front page of the local section. "HOA president demands removal of solar panels she uses. Sunset Ridge dispute highlights conflicts between clean energy and community rules." It was fair and well-researched. Jennifer presented both sides, included information about Arizona's solar rights laws, and featured quotes from several neighbors. The detail about Patricia using power from my panels was mentioned in the 3rd paragraph, and was absolutely the hook that made people pay attention. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story got picked up by local TV news. A reporter from Channel 12 came out and did a segment from my front yard, with my solar panels prominently visible in the background. The HOA's behavior became a minor social media sensation, with people mocking Patricia's hypocrisy. But more importantly, it started a broader conversation about HOAs and solar rights. A state legislator contacted me asking if I'd be willing to testify in support of a bill to strengthen protections for homeowners who wanted to install solar panels. I agreed. Patricia, meanwhile, went silent. No more letters, no more complaints to code enforcement, no more door-to-door campaigns. For 2 weeks, nothing. Then I got a call from Richard Kowalski. "Aaron, I wanted to give you a heads up. There's going to be a special board meeting tomorrow night. We're voting on whether to remove Patricia as president." What happened? After that news story, several board members who'd been silent started speaking up. Turns out Patricia has been, let's say, managing the HOA finances in ways that weren't entirely transparent. Denise did an audit and found some irregularities. Nothing huge, but concerning. Combined with the PR disaster from your situation, there's enough support to remove her. Will she fight it? Probably, but the bylaws are clear. A majority of the board can remove the president with cause. We have the votes. I attended that meeting along with about 40 other curious homeowners. Patricia showed up looking defensive and angry. Richard, as vice president, chaired the meeting. We're here to discuss concerns that have been raised about the president's handling of HOA affairs, specifically financial management and decision-making that may not be in the community's best interest. Denise presented her findings. Patricia had been approving payments to her preferred contractors without getting competitive bids, as required by the bylaws. She'd spent almost $12,000 in HOA funds on legal fees fighting my solar panels, without board approval for that level of expenditure. She'd also failed to properly document several expenses, making it difficult to audit where money had gone. None of it was clearly criminal, but it was sloppy at best and self-dealing at worst. One of the contractors who'd received multiple payments without competitive bidding was owned by Patricia's son-in-law. Patricia defended herself angrily. "I've been president for 7 years. I've maintained property values and kept this community looking beautiful. If there are minor paperwork issues, that's just because I've been too busy actually doing the work to worry about bureaucratic nonsense." But the board had made up its mind. They voted 3-1 to remove Patricia as president, with Patricia casting the only vote against. Richard would serve as interim president until the next election. Patricia stood up, grabbed her belongings, and walked out without another word. The room was silent until the door closed behind her. Then everyone started talking at once. After the meeting, Denise approached me. "I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner. I could see Patricia was being unreasonable about your panels, but I didn't want to rock the boat. I should have stood up for what was right." "I appreciate that," I said. "What happens now with the HOA? We'll run a normal election in 3 months. In the meantime, Richard and I will handle things, hopefully with a lighter touch than Patricia had. We're also going to review all the bylaws and make sure they're actually enforceable and reasonable." I thought that was finally the end of the saga. The lawsuit Marcus had filed was still pending, but with Patricia removed from power, we expected the new board to settle. And they did, 2 weeks later. The HOA agreed to pay my legal fees, about $8,000, and to permanently approve the solar installation with no fines or penalties. I signed the settlement with relief. It had been 7 months since Patricia first knocked on my door with her clipboard and attitude. 7 months of stress, conflict, and uncertainty. But I'd won, and more importantly, other homeowners would have an easier path to solar installations. 3 neighbors ended up installing panels within the next 2 months. Sarah Mills, the woman who'd complained about Patricia's wreath policing, put in a system even larger than mine. Frank got a smaller setup that just offset his air conditioning costs. A couple at the end of the street installed panels and a battery backup system. The neighborhood started to change. Not dramatically, but noticeably. People were friendlier, more willing to talk to each other. The HOA meetings, now run by Richard, were shorter and less contentious. A new rule was proposed and passed that any exterior modification that complied with state and local law would be presumptively approved by the HOA unless there was a compelling specific reason to deny it. Patricia stayed in her house but kept a low profile. I'd see her occasionally at the grocery store or driving through the neighborhood, but we never spoke. She'd look away whenever our eyes met. About 4 months after her removal as president, I was working in my garage when a white sedan pulled up. 2 people in business attire got out, a man and a woman, both carrying badges. They approached my open garage door. "Aaron Zimmerman?" the woman asked. "That's me. I'm Detective Sarah Mendoza with the Scottsdale Police Department, White Collar Crime Division. This is my partner, Detective James Wu. We're investigating financial irregularities at the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" My stomach dropped. "Of course. What's this about?" We sat on my patio and Detective Mendoza explained. After Patricia was removed as president, the new board had hired a professional accountant to conduct a thorough audit of HOA finances. What they found went way beyond sloppy bookkeeping. Over the course of 5 years, Patricia had systematically diverted HOA funds to her personal accounts and to businesses owned by family members. We're talking about approximately $180,000 in fraudulent payments and embezzlement, Detective Wu said. Payments to contractors who never did work, reimbursements for expenses that were personal rather than HOA related, cash withdrawals from HOA accounts that went directly to her. It was sophisticated enough that she hid it across multiple budget categories, but once we started pulling everything together, the pattern was clear. "Why are you talking to me?" I asked. "We're interviewing anyone who had significant conflicts with Miss Thornberry. We're trying to establish a pattern of behavior and motivation. Can you walk us through your experience with her?" I told them everything, showing them documentation I still had. Detective Mendoza took notes throughout. "This is helpful," she said when I finished. "It establishes that she was willing to abuse her authority to harass homeowners who challenged her. We have similar stories from 3 other people, going back years. What happens now? We're building a case for theft, fraud, and possibly racketeering if we can establish an ongoing criminal enterprise. We'll present to the prosecutor's office within the month." 6 weeks later, Patricia Thornberry was arrested at her home. The local news covered it, including a brief mention of the solar panel dispute as part of the background. She was charged with 23 counts of fraud and theft, with the total amount now calculated at over $200,000. Her arraignment was brief. She pleaded not guilty, was released on bond, and immediately put her house up for sale. The for sale sign went up the next day. The case moved slowly through the courts. Marcus explained this was normal for white-collar crime. Lots of financial documentation to review and expert witnesses to line up. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor's office was being aggressive, possibly because of the media attention the case had received. Meanwhile, life in Sunset Ridge improved. The HOA election brought in a new board that was younger and more progressive. They updated bylaws, streamlined approval processes, and generally made the whole operation more transparent and less adversarial. Solar panels became common enough that nobody even commented on them anymore. My installation continued to work flawlessly. Over the first full year, I generated about 84,000 kilowatt hours, used about 56,000, and fed 28,000 back into the grid. APS paid me just over $2,200 for the excess power. My electric bills were zero, and I was actually making a small profit while reducing my carbon footprint. The state legislator I'd talked to introduced a bill strengthening solar rights and limiting HOA authority over clean energy installations. It passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law. I was invited to the signing ceremony, which felt surreal. A year earlier, I'd just been a guy trying to put solar panels on his roof. Now I was part of a larger movement. Patricia's trial was scheduled for 14 months after her arrest. I was subpoenaed as a witness, not about the financial crimes but to provide context about her behavior and abuse of authority. I testified for about 30 minutes, describing the solar panel dispute and her escalating retaliation. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, contractor invoices, testimony from the accountant who did the audit, testimony from board members who'd worked with Patricia. Her defense was essentially that she'd been sloppy with paperwork, but had no criminal intent, that any money she took was proper reimbursement for her extensive volunteer work. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted her on 19 of the 23 counts. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge gave her 4 years in state prison and ordered her to pay full restitution of $203,000 to the HOA. I didn't attend the sentencing, but I read about it in the newspaper. According to the article, Patricia showed no remorse, insisting even in her final statement that she'd been unfairly targeted and that she'd only tried to maintain community standards. The whole experience changed my perspective on a lot of things. I'd always thought of HOAs as basically benign, maybe a little annoying but ultimately harmless. I learned they could be tools for petty tyrants if nobody paid attention. But I also learned that when communities came together, when people stood up for what was right, positive change was possible. My solar panels still sit on my roof, generating clean energy and feeding power back to my neighbors. On sunny days, watching the production meter tick upward, I think about Patricia demanding I remove them while using the very electricity they produced. The irony never gets old. I stayed in the house, obviously. Sunset Ridge became a genuinely nice place to live once the leadership changed. Frank and I became good friends. We'd sit on his porch sometimes in the evenings, drinking beer and watching the sunset over the desert. "You ever regret installing those panels?" he asked me one night. Given all the trouble they caused, I thought about it. Not for a second. The panels were the right thing to do environmentally and economically. And if I hadn't installed them, Patricia would still be president, probably still embezzling, still making everyone miserable. Sometimes doing the right thing is messy, but that doesn't make it less right. Frank clinked his beer bottle against mine. Amen to that. The solar panels kept producing power. The HOA kept functioning with reasonable people in charge. And Patricia Thornberry started serving her sentence at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. The story made the rounds on social media every few months as people discovered it and shared it as an example of HOA nightmares and karmic justice. I gave a few interviews to solar industry publications about my experience. My story became a case study in fighting back against unreasonable HOA restrictions. I received emails from people across the country dealing with similar situations, asking for advice. I always told them the same thing: know the law, document everything, and don't back down when you're right. 2 years after the whole thing started, I was contacted by a producer from a true crime podcast that focused on white-collar crime. They wanted to do an episode about Patricia's embezzlement scheme, with my solar panel dispute as the opening hook. I agreed and spent 2 hours on the phone being interviewed. The episode came out a few months later. The HOA president who fell from power, how solar panels exposed a years-long fraud. It was well done, thoroughly researched, and brought the story to a whole new audience. For a week, my inbox was flooded with messages from people who'd heard it. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I continued working from home, continued generating more power than I needed, continued enjoying the beautiful Arizona weather without astronomical electric bills. The neighborhood solar installations multiplied. By the 3-year mark, about 15% of homes in Sunset Ridge had panels. We'd become a showcase for residential solar adoption. The HOA, under new leadership, actually embraced it. They created a green community initiative highlighting our solar installations and other environmental efforts. Property values in Sunset Ridge increased faster than surrounding neighborhoods, partly due to the desirability of the solar-friendly policies. I ran into one of the real estate agents who'd signed Patricia's petition against my panels. She looked embarrassed when she saw me at a community event. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Patricia told us solar panels hurt property values, and I backed her up because that's what I'd always heard. But I've sold 3 houses in this neighborhood in the last year, and every buyer specifically mentioned the solar-friendly HOA as a selling point. One couple chose Sunset Ridge over another community specifically because we allow panels. I was completely wrong." "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. "I'm actually getting panels installed on my own house next month," she admitted. "Better late than never, right?" 4 years after Patricia knocked on my door that morning, I was invited to speak at a renewable energy conference in Phoenix. The topic was overcoming regulatory and social barriers to residential solar adoption. I talked about my experience, the legal issues, the community organizing, and ultimately the vindication. During the Q&A, someone asked if I'd ever spoken to Patricia after everything that happened. "No," I said. "She went to prison, and I moved on with my life. I don't bear her any ill will at this point. She made her choices, and she's facing the consequences. I hope she's had time to reflect and maybe grow from the experience, but that's not my concern. My concern was always just being able to keep my solar panels and help other people get theirs." Patricia was released on parole after serving 2.5 years of her 4-year sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to New Mexico to live with her daughter. Her house had sold for less than market value due to the stigma of the case. She was reportedly paying off the restitution in installments. I felt a strange sense of closure when I heard she'd left Arizona. The last physical reminder of the conflict was gone. Sunset Ridge was fully mine now, a place where I'd fought for what was right and won. The solar panels continued to produce power, year after year. The system had a 25-year warranty, and the installer projected it would last even longer with proper maintenance. Every month, APS sent me a check for the excess power I generated. Every month, my neighbors benefited from the local generation, reducing grid load and transmission costs. 5 years after installation, I generated over 420,000 kilowatt-hours of electricity and had been paid over $11,000 for the excess. The environmental impact was equivalent to planting about 240 trees or taking 2 cars off the road for a year. Those numbers meant something to me. More importantly, Sunset Ridge had become a model for how HOAs could work with homeowners rather than against them on environmental initiatives. Other communities reached out asking how we'd manage the transition. Richard, still serving on the board though no longer president, gave presentations at other HOAs about updating bylaws and changing culture. "You started something," he told me at a neighborhood barbecue. "You probably didn't mean to, but you did. This whole community is better because you stood your ground." I looked around at the gathering. Solar panels were visible on rooftops throughout the neighborhood. People were laughing, talking, genuinely enjoying each other's company. This was what community was supposed to be. "I just wanted to put solar panels on my roof," I said. "Everything else kind of happened because of Patricia's reaction." "Maybe," Richard agreed, "but you could have just removed the panels, paid the fine, avoided the conflict. You chose to fight, and that made all the difference." That night, sitting on my patio under the stars, I thought about the journey. From that first aggressive knock on my door to becoming an inadvertent advocate for solar rights and HOA reform. From facing $28,000 in fines to being paid by the power company for the electricity I generated. From being harassed by a corrupt HOA president to seeing her convicted and imprisoned. It hadn't been easy. There were times I'd questioned whether it was worth the stress and conflict. Times I'd laid awake at night worrying about the financial implications of the fines, about the lawsuit, about what would happen if I lost. But I'd been right, both legally and morally, and I'd had the resources and stubbornness to see it through. Not everyone would have been able to fight the way I did. That thought bothered me. How many people had Patricia bullied over the years who didn't have the money for a lawyer or the knowledge to fight back? How many had just given in, removed their solar panels or their unapproved mailbox or their wrong shade of beige paint because fighting seemed too hard? That's why I continued to share my story when asked. Why I testified for the solar rights bill. Why I answered emails from strangers dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Because the fight shouldn't be this hard, and the only way to change that was to keep speaking up. The solar panels on my roof weren't just generating electricity anymore. They were a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny, of environmental responsibility, of community improvement through individual action. Every kilowatt hour they produced was a small victory. And somewhere in New Mexico, Patricia Thornberry was living with the consequences of her choices, while I lived with mine. I chose to install solar panels to fight for them, to refuse to back down. She chose to abuse her authority, to embezzle funds, to make my life hell for daring to challenge her. We both got what we deserved. The sun rose over Scottsdale every morning, hitting my solar panels at the optimal angle, converting photons into electrons, feeding clean energy into the grid that powered my neighbors' homes. Including, for the years she lived there, Patricia's home. The irony still made me smile. I'd won more than a legal battle. I'd helped change a community, influence state law, and inspire other people to stand up for their rights. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to reduce his carbon footprint and save some money on electricity. The story didn't end with Patricia's conviction or release. It continued every day, with every kilowatt hour generated, with every new solar installation in Sunset Ridge, with every HOA that thought twice before trying to bully a homeowner over legally protected rights. My solar panels sat on my roof in the Arizona sun, doing exactly what I'd installed them to do, and nobody could tell me to remove them. That simple fact, after everything that happened, never stopped feeling like a victory.